Growth slashed. Borrowing soaring. What does this mean for you and your finances? My name's Tom Harwood and this is GBN Money. Well, it's been 2 days of bad news for Chancellor Rachel Reeves. First, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, slashed the UK's growth expectations down from 1.6 to 1.1% for this year. Now, of course, Rachel Reeves is a Chancellor who became Chancellor on a singular promise of growth. Well, now the International Monetary Fund is saying no. Britain will be growing more slowly than was expected. The Chancellor, of course, says that this is due to international factors, that this is down to President Donald Trump and his tariff regime. But I'm afraid the Chancellor has run into a headlong battle with the chief economist of the IMF, who says that this is not due to those international factors primarily, and instead largely down to domestic factors. What could those domestic factors be? Well, borrowing is up, inflation is up, and most of all, tax is up. Yes, it became more expensive to employ people, particularly to employ people on lower wages, when Rachel Reeves raised national insurance back in her first budget. That tax rise of tens of billions of pounds has put an albatross around the neck of the British economy. But that wasn't the only bad bit of news that the Chancellor has had this week, because following on from the International Monetary Fund, we had the Office for National Statistics. Yes, it turns out that Rachel Reeves has not only been borrowing around the £50 billion extra mark than she laid out in her initial budget. No, borrowing is even higher still. £15 billion more than was even expected beforehand. This revision by our National Statistics Authority has raised questions about how this new black hole might be plugged. Yes, £15 billion more borrowing this year and lower growth to pay for it all. What on earth can be done to fill that gap?
Have you been getting a load of spam in your email recently? What about random calls? It's really annoying, isn't it? Data brokers are out there collecting your personal information. Anything from your email, your full name, your address, and even your political affiliation. Cyber criminals can even use AI to mimic the voices of friends and family to trick people into sending them money. And it gets even worse. People out there are getting huge loans taken out in their names without even knowing about it. But don't worry, because the sponsor of this video, Incogni, can help. They reach out to the data brokers on your behalf and request that your information is removed from their databases. Incogni continues to make sure that your data is removed automatically from the internet via repeated removal requests. So, how can you get started? Well, step 1, hit the link in the description, create an Incogni account and tell us whose data you'd like removed. Step 2, grant Incogni the right to work on your behalf. Step 3, sit back, relax, and watch Incogni work. They will update consistently so you know when your data has been removed. Incogni is risk-free for 30 days, so you can try it for yourself and you'll get a free refund if the service isn't for you. So take back your personal data today with Incogni. Use the code GBNews using the link in the description below and you'll get 60% off an annual payment plan.
Of course, in a growing economy, you have more goods, more services, more cash flushing around that system. And indeed, that makes it a happier position if you're the Chancellor to plug those spending gaps. You naturally get more income if you have more growth. But if you have lower growth, and if you have higher borrowing, well, you actually have less tax receipts with which to plug that borrowing gap. How then do you achieve that tricky equation that all chancellors must achieve, trying to balance those books? Do you cut more spending or do you raise more taxes? Well, this has already happened once to the Chancellor. Of course, there was what the Conservatives called an emergency budget only this year. It was not called an emergency budget by the Chancellor, of course. She called it her spring statement. But it did seem to row back on this idea that the Chancellor pushed when she was standing for election, saying there should be one fiscal event per year. Well, it looks like this year we're on course for 2. But of course, in that spring statement, the Chancellor did not raise extra taxes. Instead, she found savings. She decided to cut mainly the welfare budget. She also decided to make efficiencies with regard to civil servants across all departments in central government. But how much further could she cut to fill this new £15 billion black hole? Could she find further cuts in other departments that are already suggesting that they have been cut to the bone? Are we going to see more layoffs of more civil servants? Or could, as some estimates suggest, that the expensive layoff rounds, at least in early years, could those actually cost more than they save? Voluntary redundancy schemes tend to give generous payouts, particularly to public sector workers. Could this in the short term actually make the black hole debt problem worse? That is a difficult sum for the Chancellor to try to add together. And yet there is, of course, the other side of the ledger. It's not all about spending, it's also about tax take. Given that the Chancellor has made some decisions on spending that has already thrown ire her way from her own party, particularly around disability benefits, well, could she instead this time look to raise extra taxes? Of course, the Chancellor is on the record in opposition, years ago having said that we tax wealth too lightly in this country. Could Rachel Reeves try to reassess the bans, for example, for council tax, trying to change the way that we assess that and meaning that more people pay far higher levels? Could she too look at areas of capital gains? Could she look at wealth that is held up in housing and other assets that people own? Well, that is a potential avenue for the Chancellor. She's spoken about it at length before she got through that famous door to number 11 Downing Street. But of course, there are other ways to raise taxes. Some people have been suggesting that taxes in this country are only high on those who earn lots of money. This is a controversial view amongst economists, but it is also more controversial perhaps amongst the general public. Could the way that the Chancellor finds more money actually be to go after those who earn less money? Yes, some economists suggest that the tax cuts that have been focused on those on low income in the last 15 or so years have reduced the broadness of that tax base that we have in the country, to the extent that those on high incomes account for stupendously high degrees of the tax that is taken in. How much further could those earning significant amounts of money be taxed? And could the Chancellor instead go after those earning less money? It's easy to see how that would be a political minefield, and rightly so. People who earn less money have been facing a high cost of living. People have been facing they've been at the sharpest end of the raising prices. Inflation, of course, affects as a percentage of people's expenditure those who have less disposable income to start with. It's a huge, huge conundrum for the Chancellor, and it is one that will be difficult to solve unless she is able to find that elusive word, that elusive concept that she first spoke about upon becoming Chancellor: growth. Unless the economy grows, the most horrendous decisions have to be taken by the Chancellor. Will she tax people more? And perhaps she's already squeezed those who have plenty of money the most that they could be squeezed. It seems that tax take is lower than the ONS initially expected it to be. Why could tax take be lower if the number of taxes levied has risen, if the degree of those taxes levied has risen? Why could that take be lower? Well, we do have an exodus in this country. Millionaires are leaving by the thousands. Yes, more millionaires have left this country by some measures, particularly by research conducted by the Adam Smith Institute. More millionaires are leaving this country than any other country, save for the People's Republic of China. Yes, is it really the case that the United Kingdom has as bad a millionaire exodus as an officially communist country? That would be a damning indictment indeed on the way this government, and indeed some of the policies of the previous government, have targeted those who create wealth. It's a difficult decision for the Chancellor, and it's a difficult position for anyone in charge of British finances. Where is there to cut? Where could there be to raise taxes? Or could this elusive growth be found after all? What sort of supply-side reform could be delivered to genuinely boost the income of this government without the need for those painful tax rises that some economists have suggested are dragging down this country's growth potential due to the difficulty that it's placed on businesses, the businesses that create the wealth in the first place? What does this mean for all of us, the taxpayers of this country, the people who are hoping for a buoyant economy with plentiful jobs and low, stable tax rates? Well, I'm afraid to say we just don't know. This is an uncertain time in the global economy, with inflation expectations rising, not falling, the debt of this government growing, not shrinking, and frankly the growth, that all-important growth rate, being revised down by the International Monetary Fund, not, as their chief economist says, due to exogenous factors, not due to external factors, but due instead to domestic factors. The government has a lot of thinking to do. Well, my name's been Tom Harwood, and this is GBN Money. Don't forget to subscribe to the GBN YouTube channel for more original analysis and exclusive content.